settlement, right? This is an exciting moment, right? I mean, we are going to have a legitimate opportunity to run that great experiment of privately owned facilities, if you guys are able to raise the money to do it. And that's really the exciting part, right? And I think that's kind of one of the things that will be good to kind of draw out what are those opportunities that you guys are seeing, you know, what does it look like from our perspective inside the labyrinth, and where do those things come together?
So we'll start off with I came with a list of questions which we discussed last night a little bit. First question, which you raised, Alex and Jeff, you speech. What specific items do commercial companies need, I should say, for commercial space stations to become a reality? Not just, oh, I have an idea, or even, here's my design. Rather, okay, you want to go to my space station, it'll cost you $1 million, whatever your number is. Here's the contract to sign, we'll get you up there within 2 months.
As I mentioned, you need a stable legal climate, you need a stable political climate. I think we have both of those now. You need government as customer because they have strategic and research needs to go into space. And doesn't mean, in fact, under US law, we can't, if we have a service that we're providing to NASA, we can't charge less to the commercial sector. So it's not like we're looking for something, you know, hey, we're going to take advantage of the government here, but we really need the government as customer. And so the problem with that, which I guess we'll get into in a moment, is when do you start to ask for government as customer and you're asking for them to stop being a user of International Space Station? So that is the paradox we are all going to face. So I would say those three things: a stable legal regime, a stable political regime, and government as customer are the basic tenets of raising capital for your own platform.
It may also be worth mentioning that the government as customer is not only NASA, which is a conversation. I think when we have this conversation, we tend to focus a lot on NASA. But, for example, I'm a policy advisor to CASIS right now, which manages the International Lab, and one of the mandates of CASIS is to bring in other government agencies. So we spend a lot of time talking to USDA or the National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense. Okay, so government as customer is not just NASA, right? It's the government and whatever those needs might be. And so there's a lot of different versions of that.
To expand on that further, right, it's not just even necessarily U.S. governments, right? There's been a lot of talk over the years of kind of the sovereign client model, right? To a certain extent, although Lithuania was actually kind of funded by private individuals, to a certain extent they represented a type of sovereign client, right? A country.
We have ESA now as a commercial client.
Right.
And I'm trying to think, there's a Romanian Space Agency we're just signing with now. So.
Right, so that's one of the models people have been talking about for a long time, that potentially other governments' astronauts may want to go fly to commercial stations. One anecdote that I'll share that I think is relevant is that for that to be a viable, long-term, and repeatable market, there needs to be effective applications that those astronauts engage in. And one of the ways that I kind of learned that was when I was traveling from the UK to the first job I had at NASA. I passed through Malaysia. I was there at the time that they sent up their astronaut. Those famous Russian deals where, you know, if you buy 25 MiG fighter jets, you get spaceflight for free, you know? And so the Malaysians had taken them up on this opportunity, and they'd sent their astronaut called an Angkasawan, and it was amazing because, of course, Kuala Lumpur was just full of banners on all the buses, on all the street corners. But one of the challenges was that if you read the newspaper articles, one of the critiques that were very common, and then if you talk to people on the street, one of the critiques that was very common as well was what is doing? You know, what are the research applications? A lot was made of a version of essentially a Malaysian version of JAX, which I think was called 3 Stones. So this was an activity that the astronaut engaged in, and this was a source of criticism because, of course, there was no principal objection to spaceflight. The objection was, if we're going to be doing this, we should be doing something of legitimate value, economic value, technological value, scientific value. And so I think that's where the application side becomes very important as well.
Regarding the application issues, we have cases as an organization right now that is enabling, or is at least one form of enabling new application users. We also have NanoRacks that's enabling in another fashion. A, do we need more? And B, how do we get more if we need more?
It's enough. It's enough. You can move on. It's enough. No, I mean, I'd be a hypocrite. I mean, competition is good. It's the bedrock. I mean, I'm not sure we need more NGOs, but the hope is that, again, as I said, you have I mean, right now, we know that, let's say in 5 years, you'll have 5 ways to send humans to and from space. That's pretty extraordinary. You're going to have Boeing, you're going to have SpaceX, you're going to have Roscosmos, and you have the Chinese, and you can be looking at Blue in a few years, and you know, it's just an extraordinary time when you just look at the range of opportunities, and so the more destinations, the more ways to get to and from space is far better.
So we've worked with NanoRacks now for 6 years almost, right? The NGO, the cases, has been around for 4, almost 4. Yes, we need more. I'm with Jeff. We don't need another nonprofit, right, managing the national lab. That's the point of having cases. But we do need other commercial companies doing the kinds of things NanoRacks does. We are trying to enable those. Jeff, you know, whether he wants competition or not, I want him to have the competition.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
Sorry. But we absolutely need more ways to move out on this commercial front and to generate the kind of business and use that NanoRacks has across a broader range of fields, across different parts of industry, in areas none of us have even thought about being viable as a market yet. Well, I mean, like they said this morning, we don't know where all those markets are. And they're going to be things none of us have even thought of. And while Jeff has thought of a whole lot of them, there's a whole lot more. And so we need more companies like that stepping out, and we're doing what we can to enable them.
I mean, to be a little more serious than my flippant comment, NanoRacks faces extraordinary competition today. I mean, one is able to deploy CubeSats to a whole range of vehicles. What we've done at NanoRacks is make the space station relevant into this competitive marketplace. And the question, and as I say, in the future, I think space tourism will have a multiplicity of places to go. So the question really becomes, why is it important that we make space station relevant to the commercial marketplace? And having given this a lot of thought, the answer for me goes back to the slide in my presentation, was we need destinations. And for me, in an ironic way or a convoluted way, the importance of deploying small satellites from the station is it makes platforms relevant today. It makes destinations. I don't want to be in a world where we're just launching rockets, sending off satellites. I want to be in a place where, in the near future, we're living and working in space. And if it takes being in the competitive market of CubeSats and small sats to do that, I'm game, and so allowing it. So.
Something you mentioned earlier, I think it was Mary Ellen you mentioned it, was the issue of getting NASA to us. I think that was you, Mary Ellen.
I'm sure at some point in my life it has been, yes.
The question is how do we structure that into the topic of this conversation, frankly? But there are timing issues. What do people see as the outstanding issues and possible paths forwards for those issues?
So, begin by saying I do not speak for the space agency. It's my constant disclaimer. But from a policy point of view, NASA uses the space station to develop knowledge and applications, among other things, for going beyond Earth orbit. It also does some basic research. But part of what it uses the station for in a really significant way is to buy down risk associated with beyond Earth orbit exploration. And there's a very sort of beautiful, methodical, groundbreaking risk matrix and very systematic way of identifying those risks and then retiring those risks in a very prioritized basis that actually drives program allocations and a lot of other things, okay, that is being utilized right now inside the station program to try and burn down those risks. So what do we need to know about how humans can function in space, beyond space, during transportation, between long distances that are separated? Okay, all that kinds of, what's the radiation environment like? What's the microgravity system doing to this system? There are a whole lot of things that we need to know, and NASA's using those things. And NASA will continue to need an environment in which it buys down those risks to a certain point. The question is, what's that point? Where do you get to the point where you say, okay, I've retired enough risk, or I've got risk down to the point where I can't maybe fix it all, but I can identify it and then make decisions about how I'm going to manage it or how I'm going to respond to it. And that question continues to be one that is debated inside the agency and sort of moves back and forth inside the agency. And I would say that the window's narrowing on it, okay, but it's not set. From a commercial point of view, the issue is, how do you know when you're there? When you know that you have a sufficient critical mass of investment and endeavor and applications being developed and new ideas and entrepreneurial avenues and all the rest of that. And the fact that what Jeff was talking about in terms of avenues to get to low Earth orbit, other space agencies also are beginning to look at models that look like nanoracks or look like you may get more competition, right, in the next few years, because they're looking at cases. We were at the ISS Research and Development Conference last week, and I spent a bunch of time with the Russian Space Agency, talking with them about the cases model and how they might start to think about applying it. So there's going to be more than the existing avenues here, hopefully more avenues. When do you decide it's time to end that? And my quick answer would be when there's a sufficient demand, okay, that you can basically begin to generate need for other platforms, whatever those platforms look like, and that you have paying customers who are going to utilize those platforms, and you are still, and this is one of the tricks, able to keep operational costs low enough, all right, that when you're moving off of the station, okay, you can generate revenues that allow you to get profit. Okay, so that's sort of a quick answer, and it's not necessarily a great one. And there's another debate, and I flip from side to side on this, about whether or not do we need to say there is an end date. The businesswoman in me says, yeah, an end date would be really useful. The person in me that's sort of supporting beyond Earth exploration is going, well, so that's a whole other debate we might want to have.
Well, let's dig into that just a little bit. You need, now I can't remember. You need to have cost low. You have to have users generated. All that sounds like you can create a situation whereby you create a metric where you'll see it. We're going to take the question of ISS end of life from a political question to an economic question or a business question. Is there a way to structure it that way?
So I think Marilyn was identifying something that's really important, which are what are the metrics that we need to establish, the indicators, right? And there are a number of indicators, right? There are indicators in terms of the research. That's why I was saying metrics initially, because there are certain metrics that we need to understand well for long-term human spaceflight, right? And we will be able to establish, and are in the process of doing so, what those indicators are when we've met those milestones. There are other indicators, right? The total amount of private capital going into research that is being flown through the national lab. That's another indicator, right? And this is completely off the top of my head, but I would want to see that to be more than a couple million a year before I thought that there was a viable market. And so then you have to think of, well, okay, what are those potential types of applications? Obviously, CubeSats are one of them, but as you said, there are many other competitive sources for that. Potentially, you want microgravity applications. Well, what are those? Again, and how many do you need? Right, and so those are some of those indicators, and I think it's something that we're starting to have a conversation on as a kind of national community, but I think we really do need to kind of continue to say, well, what really is that? Okay, there are some of these estimations for space station operation costs, right? There are some of these estimations for potential commercial customers based on the following markets. One thing I'll throw out here, a couple days ago, we just put out our solicitation, our annual solicitation from the Emerging Space Office for economic research for space development. We did this last year, this is this year's. So if you have good ideas, please go read the solicitation. If you have any sort of empirical research on economics for space development, go read the solicitation. But one of the areas that we called out specifically this year in the appendix was around empirical demand-side estimates for low Earth orbit commercial space stations. Because this is one of the areas that I think we want to get much smarter on. And we want it to be empirical. Right. I mean, I do love the the Jeff Manber memory plot of all previous things that Jeff Manber's been involved with that raise money, and I think that's a really good start. But I think we also want we want the empirical data, and I would love for someone to be able to kind of go over to Energia and kind of pull out some of that really hard raw data and some of that extrapolation. But that's just only one part of it. That's one of the ways in which you can start building that.
One of the problems, I mean, you've articulated very well, one of the problems is people in the commercial sector will never really give you honest data. And we get asked, with the exception of us, we get asked quite often, like after the string of failures, the U.S. government wants to know, how much did we lose on SpaceX 7? How much did we lose on Orb 3? On one hand, you want to go crying and tell them, but on the other hand, you don't want to share your costs. And so one of the tough issues for the decision makers at NASA and the administration and Congress on this issue we're discussing this morning of the transition is you're not going to get the best data from the private sector.
No, it's really true. And in many respects, it's why the Emerging Space Office was established with an economic research focus, because it is very hard to get good industry data. And so it's also why in our annual call, there is every year a call for economic history research, including for private sector companies. Because traditionally in economic historical research, you establish these numbers well after the fact. For exactly the kind of the interests that you describe, people don't want to reveal them while they're actually still relevant. And so you establish these trends and these functions kind of after the fact, and we're just kind of finally getting to the point where we have enough history of industrial research where you can start doing that. But again, that's a long, long process, but we are starting that, and so that's the last thing I'll say about the call. Go check Anspire's economic research for space development.
And I just want to add to this from a policy point of view, as an entrepreneur, you always want things to happen like now. As long as you can sort of predict the now and the next now and the next now and the next now, which you try to do as much as possible. Predictability is huge. But one of the problems is from a policy point of view, you want to set up policy that enables all these things to happen, right? But when you can't get this data, and I can give you an example. So I was on the National Research Council Human Spaceflight Committee that produced the Pathways to Exploration report last year. And I was just talking to Rand Simberg about this particular issue before we came in the door, which is what I was trying to do as an economic analysis that sort of looked at all the interrelationships between all the rocket companies on the power plants they were using, so on the engines. So I was trying to look at the costs, like what are you guys paying for this engine, this engine, this engine, and I was looking across all the different platforms that were using those engines. Well, they would be willing to tell me some of that stuff off the record, but the problem with the NRC is it can only publish findings based on publicly available data. So another thing that happened, okay, that's one of the rules. So another one of the things that happened was that we were briefed extensively by almost every single commercial space company. Okay, people that were interested in asteroid mining, people that were doing transportation, all kinds of people. But some of what they did was disclose information to us on their business cases, start to give us that, and we would have to go, wait. Okay, whatever it is that you show us, or the National Research Council, we have to be able to publish it, and everybody would go, totally understandable. But the outcome of that is that particular study was requested by Congress to advise Congress, okay, not NASA, there's a point this, okay, to advise Congress, okay, on developing policy sort of enabling human exploration. And yet, there are these pieces that are missing from it, and the report was really criticized on that basis, but this is the reason why. Okay, because that information can't be published. So this issue is more than an academic issue. It ends up impacting entrepreneurs that are sitting in this room trying to figure out how it is that they're going to go forward. Okay, because from a policy point of view, we're always lagging. So.
I wanted to return to your actual question, which is what does the transition look like, right? And I want to kind of put out there what I think, at least from my perspective, is kind of the optimal scenario. And the optimal scenario is a fully privately financed space station going up when it is ready, right? And I think that it's valuable to keep that in mind, that before one gets too concerned with questions of ISS end of life and what is the NASA role and all this kind of stuff, that in many respects the optimal scenario really is that, right? And that people in the audience who are very passionate about spaceflight development and long-term human habitation, that really is kind of, in some respects, the first preferred option for NASA and for the private sector, because it means there are going to be less strings attached, there's going to be less contractual complexity, and so striving for that is, I think, a valuable thing, and I think also that it's possible. Right? I think that the capital markets globally, and I say globally on purpose, are such that it is very possible to be able to field such a facility. No guarantee, a lot of hard work, you're talking major infrastructure development, but it's quite possible. And I'll tell one more anecdote that kind of reminds me of why that's such a first preferred option. Our previous chief technologist was Mason Peck, and Mason Peck had organized a conversation with Neil Stephenson, right? The sci-fi writer, because Neil Stephenson is very passionate about spaceflight development and technology. And he's got a great group of kind of Seattle cyberpunk, techno kind of optimist, folks who are full of great ideas for private sector activity. And so we're going up there, kind of figuring out some sort of, interesting topics in NASA innovation around kind of the Asteroid Grand Challenge. And it was really interesting because we were having all these conversations, and of course, reflexively, people would be kind of saying, wouldn't it be great if NASA did X? Wouldn't it be great if NASA did Y? And of course, I'm struck by some of the irony of here, the cyberpunk, kind of folks are kind of still looking to the government to achieve their intrinsic motivations. And it was especially ironic because the night that we were doing this was September 30th, 2013. Does anyone know what happens on October 1st, 2013? The entire government shuts down. Right? And so this conversation goes through midnight, and while we're having the conversation about, what NASA can do for the future of private sector human spaceflight, I remind everyone that just so you know, like, we're unemployed for the following 13, 15 days. So this is one reason why the first preferred option is independently financed private human spaceflight stations.
I have a few more questions, but I also do want to open up to the audience participation. So if you have questions, please feel free to come to the mics. I think we have our first one, maybe.
Hi there. Are we on? Sorry. Got it. Now we're on. We heard from Chris Wake from Spire this morning that launch is the constraint to his business plan, the major constraint to his business plan. And if it's the major constraint to his business plan, it's probably one of the major constraints to the business plans of the companies that are using the ISS. Given that we've had recent failures, given that most of the world's launch vehicles will be replaced or retired in the next 5 years, what is the ISS community doing to foster or quicken the pace of launch availability, and how long will it be before organizations won't have that as a concern?
So I'm not sure I'd agree with you that that's the constraint to the business plan. If you're flying to station, right, there are anywhere from 6 to 8 vehicles, 9, 10 vehicles going up to station a year. We have upmass on just about every one of them. In fact, we do have upmass on every one of them. And depending on the needs, we can put research or users on any one of those vehicles when they're ready. I think, honestly, Made in Space made the point, it's actually crew time that's the bigger constraint for anybody going to ISS. What NASA is doing as far as making sure that launch upmass at least doesn't become the constraint is, as we looked forward in our next competition for commercial cargo vehicles, we realized we needed larger vehicles, more upmass, so those requirements are in the RFP that is in competition now, and that's about all I can say on that. But we have, one of our biggest problems on station is because of the number of vehicles that come and dock, is crew time to offload, move trash, move this here, move that here, get this out of the way. Oh wait, here comes a vehicle, we have to dock it, we have to, now it's time to undock it, the crew's got to focus on this. Ends up being, we actually want a little less traffic, but we can get as anything to orbit, and the people who are using station are not paying launch costs, right? That's all provided as part of the service that station as a program provides. We cover your launch costs, we do some of the integration work on the station, we do, you know, so in my mind, it's more the safety piece of it is a big part of it, and we are working very hard within the program to go revamp our whole approach to safety, to requirements, to operations, to try and minimize all those costs. We are in the middle of that process now. It's got a cool acronym, we call it RISE, Revolutionize ISS for Science and Engineering. The point being, we know that we are not meeting the needs of our users. A number of the things that the panel this morning brought up about safety costs and other things we're well aware of. We've heard the feedback and we're trying to go fix all of those. We're in the middle of that process now. But I don't think it's launch cost that's really the limit for station. I think it's crew time, and it's killing us, and that's, Jeff?
Yeah, I see we got a lot of folks wanting questions. I'll just say quickly, Chris, that it's also analogous to the fracking situation. When Spire has a problem today, because Spire has a problem, because Planet Labs has a problem getting to sun synchronous, a lot of folks are investing in putting up launch vehicles. They're going to overshoot. It's the nature of the capital markets. And so you're going to see in 6, 7, 8 years, you have too much capacity. Price is going to come down. And so we're in a problem now, not really because of the ISS and its low Earth orbit, 51 degrees, but really with the situation in Russia, Ukraine not coming on market with the planned vehicle, with prices being too high and here and there. It's an overall picture, and the good news for a lot of users is I'm sure everybody will overshoot. So we'll get over that.
Thank you.
Yeah, question. With COTS, you had NASA working closely with the partners, and you also had certification of operations around station for the vehicles. And with commercial crew, you've got certification of that stuff. And that seems to be useful for transferring a lot of knowledge to the private sector, that they can do that stuff properly and safely. Do you need something similar for a commercial crew industry as it or a commercial space station industry as it comes online?
So you do and you don't. So part of what we're trying to do in reinventing the program or revolutionizing the program is to set up a scenario where first-time users come in and we have enough support to teach them what they need to know to do safety. Made in Space talked about, the NASA guys did the safety and they built the hardware. And they learned a lot, and now they're able to go do it themselves. We're trying to take that model and apply that across not just, single users here and there, but any commercial company, any organization who wants to fly research to space and to set up a capacity within the space station program to, instead of beat them up as they try and learn how to do this, to teach them how to do it, and then gradually wean them off so they can do it themselves. At some level, though, you don't want them dependent on that, right? What you don't want to create is you've taught them so well that they become you, right? And one of the struggles that we're also having in the space station program is trying to cut costs, but we've taught our contractors so well to become just like the government that we can't be innovative in how to really cut costs of station sustaining to the level that it would need to be cut, that it would be commercially viable. So we don't want to teach the commercial industry so well that they end up doing it just like we do it, because we don't do it cheaply, right? We're driven by mission success, by safety of the crew, safety of the vehicle. It had to work. It had to go together right the first time, and if it didn't, everything was survive a launch and a landing and a relaunch, because just in case we were wrong and all those elements didn't go together, we wanted a second shot at it. If you're going to do a commercial space station, you may not really want to follow some of the things that NASA did, right? So in some ways, yeah, we want to do that knowledge transfer and teach people, but at the same time, we don't want you to learn it too well because we went too far, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add real quick to that. I think, though, some thought is going to have to go into, actually is going into, but more thought's going to have to go into thinking about how do you establish a pathway for people to learn sort of the business, the nuts and bolts, daily day operations, logistics, scheduling, manifesting, packing, transport, et cetera, right? Those things that are all associated with getting stuff to orbit, figuring out what you're going to do with it on orbit, how humans are going to interact with it in orbit, how you're going to get it down. So one idea that's been kicked around for a long time, and this is where I get shot, is to talk about a logistics contract,
Yeah.
right? Where the people that are now shipping stuff back and forth to the station become vendors to that contractor. They own the truck lines, okay? NASA, which currently does a lot of the scheduling, packing, and manifesting, maybe that goes commercial, right? An opportunity to start literally developing capabilities or transferring capabilities that exist here on Earth, maybe to that back, okay? Those kinds, that sort of thinking, that is underway and it needs to progress quicker than.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, like, Bigelow can produce these modules, but operating them for 10 years successfully is a whole nother ballgame, I guess is what I'm going to get at.
Right, and I think that is a recognition that that type of NACA role that was being discussed earlier is something that's going to be valuable for commercial space stations, just as it was from the COTS program, as you mentioned, and as it currently is for commercial crew. And I think because we have not yet engaged extensively in that process, we haven't come up with the best way to do that. We have to have conversations with what's actually going to be helpful. It's exactly what Mary Beth was talking about, but I think there's a recognition that is something along those lines is going to be critical. I think that's well understood.
Okay, thank you.
I also think that one of the most valuable contributions that NanoRacks has made is in showing just how NASA can work and should work with a small commercial space company. And one of the most valuable pieces of IP we now enjoy at NanoRacks is how do you run a space station?
I think most people here would agree, and I certainly agree, that the ideal would be a couple of companies come up and there's 2 or 3 commercially operated stations where NASA buys services, would not under any circumstance be an anchor tenant, never. But is it sufficiently in the national interest that if the private sector doesn't, or only one company goes up and it's a monopoly, is it sufficiently in the national interest to have LEO space stations that the NASA should come in with 5, 10, 20, 30% of the funding necessary?
That's a great question. That's true in every marketplace, and the U.S. government reviews in strategic locations. What do you do if, let's say, Bigelow and NanoRacks goes out and gets 48% funding from a country we don't view in our best interests? I mean, this is what we engage in all the time with telecom and other issues. So you raise a very valid point, and we're seeing that a little bit with commercial crew. I mean, what happens if SpaceX was to go public, or maybe doesn't go public and suddenly announces that X country sovereign fund is coming in? I mean, what would NASA do at that point? And so that's the kind of, I love these questions because this is the real world. And so you're right. What do you do?
There's the other side of that issue, which is the Amtrak problem.
Yeah.
Because we have Amtrak as a case study of we've decided we don't want to get rid of rail transportation for humans, but it's only being funded by the government, basically. I mean, yes, you have some, but let's be honest, it's not going to survive on its own by any stretch of the imagination.
Yes, I'm Terry Mistry, and I would like to know if NASA or any other private investors, they are considering to have social cause ventures. I'm studying the social entrepreneurship, and finance is a major issue, so social entrepreneurship can be used as a finance tool for commercial space stations. And the second point is India and China, with a population of each 1.3 billion, the number of billionaires, high net worth individuals are increasing. They can also be a part of the finance tools.
Can I get a business card?
No, yes. In India, for example, you should approach Reliance Industries, Mukesh Ambani and Anil Ambani.
The only thing to note is that phenomenon is very real and very important. And I think it's going to be driving a huge amount of activity, already is, and will be driving it further into the future. So well observed.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to challenge Mr. McDonald's ideal vision of the transition, which is that industry simply builds a station. I see 2 problems with this. One is it's very similar to the situation of when NASA was running the space shuttle, providing a large number of services in such a way that basically precluded commercial competition, and then saying, well, industry should just invest a lot of money to do something while NASA competes with industry. And so that's one problem. The other problem, is that we've already seen reports in the press last week that scientists are saying they don't feel comfortable doing any more work on the station because it may be brought down in 2020. And that basically 4 years, if they don't see a longer time horizon than 4 years, they can't really commit any money. And companies don't commit any money too. So when you say, why are they only committing a few $1 million? It's because the station is destined, the plan of record is the station is going to be dumped in the ocean in 2020. That is the reality. And every industry that depends, every company that depends in any way on the station will be shut down at that point. It will not work because NASA has no transition plan. Okay, so it seems to me that just hoping that somebody in industry is going to build the station, the best possible scenario in that is Dragon Lab will replace the International Space Station. That is the best, and the Chinese will dominate Earth orbit. Thank you.
So there's a few reasons. I mean, so for one, the station has got extension from the president to 2024, agreement from the Canadians with the same date. So the 2020 date is not the date that we're working to. Second, we have an active program, the Next Step BAAs, which are funding for commercial space station studies from Lockheed, Boeing, Orbital, and Bigelow, because NASA is generally interested in seeing habitation modules emerge from the private sector. So why did I say that the first preferred option was that? Well, because that problem of what happens after station is very real, right? We do need that. That's exactly why the best thing that would possibly happen would be a station that emerged before the end of the ISS end of life that was privately funded, right? That would show that there was legitimate private interest. And second, I think one of the major differences with the space shuttle analogy, and I think those types of history lessons are genuinely important, is that, as has been clear on this panel, NASA does not have intent to operate a space station in low Earth orbit after the end of the ISS. And it's true that it is unclear at the moment what that end date will be for all the reasons that we've discussed previously. But that is a major difference with the space shuttle, right? NASA was continuing to operate the space shuttle at that time, right? And of course, Jeff is familiar with the history as well, right? The Industrial Space Facility, the Max Faget history, right? So, that was NASA saying, well, we kind of like some of this as well, but we're going for the station. We're all here talking about a future that is recognized by the private sector and NASA as not having, at some point in the not too distant future, no NASA operated facility. So I think those are the major differences. And again, I'm not saying that necessarily the future that will emerge will be one where there's private sector funding for the fully for a commercial space station, but it's still the first preferred future. And the fact that we have the private sector entrepreneur here on the panel nodding to that suggests to me that this is not unrealistic.
So I guess another comment I'd make is that if before the end of space station, we really hope commercial platforms or some commercial partnership or whatever that looks like, right, start to be generated. And as soon as there is another platform to do some type of research or use of space, NASA will station, at least what we have said out loud, is that we will stop doing that on space station. If there is a platform where deploying CubeSats is commercially available, is routine, is if there's another way to do it, we will stop deploying CubeSats off of station. If somebody builds a robotic platform for protein crystal growth research, which is an area we're seeing, we fly protein crystals on every single flight, every flight. And if we get to the point in the not too distant future where somebody realizes, hey, I can build a man-tended or even an unmanned robotic platform to do protein crystal growth, we have committed that we will stop doing protein crystal growth research on station, and we will go buy services from whatever that platform is so that we can move those things off and open up station for other areas that need to be developed, right? One of our goals in the station program is not just to prove out different technologies or different research or different concepts, right? You have an idea, you want to see if this is going to work, if microgravity or low Earth orbit or Earth observation really makes a difference to you. Okay, so that's a first step. But then there's a second step of, okay, and can I do it enough, and can I make a business out of it, right? Is there a business case for that? And we are completely open, as Jeff can attest, to using Station as a platform to prove a business case. And once you've proven that business case and you've got, you know, whatever the platform is that can do that, great, move it off. And we're not just moving off your business case, we're moving everybody who has, right? We're not going to keep using our platform for that same activity. So we will not be the anchor tenant to ensure that you have enough business that your commercial platform stays in space, but we will buy whatever we need. You know, somebody builds a vivarium in space because rodent research proves to be the up and coming thing, and you know, decides that they can have a rodent platform for, you know, pharmaceutical companies. We'd be thrilled to stop doing rodent research on space station. It would free up so much crew time, everybody else would be happy, right? So we have thought through this, and we have every intention of moving away from station for our own internal research when there is another option of where to go.
I'm going to ask you to be a bit daring. At least two of you have said that the limiting factor that you see being the greatest is crew time. And looking ahead and acknowledging the difficulty of getting data, looking ahead 15, 20 years to a world of multiple commercial space stations, how many people do you see, can you see being a realistic number to be in space, both operating the space stations and doing research or whatever activities they're doing, and including all the markets, other nations, corporations, individual tourists? Who's got the nerve for this one?
Well, it was great to see you guys collaborating. You know, I'm an economist, so you can be sure that anything I project into the future is going to be wrong. So, understanding that, I'm going to say 0, because we can at least be then sure that it'll be wrong. You know, realistically, I think, you know, when we've been asked before to estimate the number of commercial paying tourists for orbit, right? People look back at the number that already paid, right? One of the really important indicators is someone actually paid to go twice, right? That's actually a generally important indicator, right? Also had the, you know, the famous statement by Richard Garriott, right, which was that, you know, it cost him, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it cost him, you know, $35, $40 million to go up, and he was able to make, you know, 10 or 15 from media deals and other things associated. I have not validated those numbers. I don't even know if those numbers he says, but it's something along those lines. You know, the moment where that crosses, either in terms of reduction in cost or an increase in the amount of revenue, you can then have many, many people going. You know, I try to tend to focus less on the projections and more on trying to understand those dynamics, that those are the core dynamics, right? How much does it cost you to get there? How much can you make once you're up there? What have people made in the past? Those are the types of numbers that we've seen in the past in terms of you know, I think there are other indicators, right? The cancellation of the recent tourist flight for Sarah Brightman, right? That's another indicator. I'm not going to speculate on why that would have been, but I will simply observe that it was a major market phenomenon that we should take note of. And so I think, you know, we're all going to have our own projections. I'm confident it will not be 0. And so I think we just all want to make sure that, you know, everyone does what they can to make sure that's not the case.
I just add one thing that what we think about at NanoRacks is not so much how many, because I think it's difficult, but more the question of why. And so that helps us in understanding what the market sectors will be. You know, we don't think people will be in space in 20 years to fight wars. Okay, that's a good thing from my view. Okay, we're not in space to claim territory. Okay, will they be in space research? Well, what about the robotics? You know, will they be in space to advance exploration and colonization? Yeah, that's where I think we're going. So, you know, so for us, it's looking at why we're going as humans and how it's changing from the last 40 years of space exploration.
I guess the only point I'd add is one of the problems in answering that question is you have 2 choices now. unmanned like Bion, for research at least. You have unmanned options like Bion, the concept of Dragon Lab, whatever, and you have manned and space station. You don't have anything in between, right? So the man-tended, the robotic, the, go up and just bring samples, do a little maintenance, come back. We don't have a platform with that, so we don't really have well bucketed from a research perspective. What do you need, right? Do you need a man-tended platform for biological research, and then or can you do that all robotically, or do you really need a manned platform like space station? Space station is permanently manned because that's what space station was for, right? Do you need it to be permanently manned to do a lot of the research? No, but until you kind of get that, figure out what fits where, you're not going to be able to figure out how many, it's going to be a tough question to answer.
And that's the argument for letting the market make a lot of these decisions, right? Because we're not smart enough to sit here and figure out, and these are smart people sitting here, and you have a bunch of smart people in the audience, and we're not smart enough to sort of figure out, no, yet, what direction that thing is going in, so.
Thank you.
This is an online question submitted through Questful. Sovereign clients seem to need a good reason to send people to space, but not all money is made by doing something scientific. A lot of money is made by selling things or services to people who buy that product. Think large screen TVs. When does the non-scientific market open up? When is space as normal as driving to San Francisco just to see it?
We actually had a little bit of discussion about this last night. The issues of, along those lines, emotional connection opportunities as opposed to just purely science.
The technical term for this is when do you allow tchotchkes in space? That's the technical term. But, and we see, this is the problem of having, we're very lucky at NanoRacks. We have NASA as a regulator, NASA as a landlord, but we don't have NASA as a competitor, unlike in the 90s. But what we still have is NASA as the regulator. And one of the things early on, when we first were getting going, NASA was very worried we'd be selling coffee mugs, this is a battle I've fought for quite some time. I mean, you watch tennis players go out, they have emblems on their suits. We have Elvis Presley on a postage stamp, but somehow space is pure. And I have had this argument, this is, it's like a chess game. Person from NASA says one thing, I say the other. We all know what we each are going to say. The Japanese are more willing to do, beer and sake that's gone. For me, it's not an outpost of humanity until it allows the things that humanity does. But NASA doesn't see it that way. In our projections, as we look in the future, we see media and branding. I mean, look, we had a game show at MirCorp that could have kept the Mir going. NBC and Mark Burnett signed. And so this is the problem. You go on military bases and they have a store and they sell, Coke and stuff, but not on the space station.
So you put thousands of engineers together in one agency, and you're surprised when they're not really tied into the human need and the human. Give me a break, Joe.
So NASA needs. So we need some painters at NASA and some poets and maybe some people making music videos.
So we're just talking about this last week again at the ISS conference, and a couple things I just want to highlight. One is that USRA, which is related to NASA and actually has gotten funding from Minton competition, national, and people basically do films and they do art pieces, and a lot of it's kids, right? I mean, it's kids in grade school and kids in high school and even college kids. And that art has some of it is flown, some of it's been shown on Earth. There's been a whole lot of stuff, and NASA's now doing one called CineSpace, which is a video competition, also sort of modeled on that original Humans and Art stuff. And so there is that outreach going on, but just to tell another story, so CASIS, when it was created, part of the goal of it was to allow things like this that NASA just couldn't get its head wrapped around. And CASIS's first big venture in this area was flying some product development for Cobra Puma Golf. And Wayne sitting over there, and I'm sure he'd be nodding at me. And Cobra Puma Golf is it's a huge golf. Anybody play golf here? Right? You got little Pumas on your, little Puma, basically, a lot of people playing golf, and golf's a multi-billion-dollar-a-year business. I mean, it's a huge business. And the amount of difficulty that CASES, which exists as a non-government organization, created in part to do this kind of thing, faced, okay, because it decided that it was going to fly something for Cobra Puma Golf, and then has now since rolled that out and has had a campaign built around it, has had marketing campaign built around it. That was done intentionally, and yet, I mean, to sort of plow the ground for some of this work. It's also an interesting project, okay, but it's basically to plow the ground for some of this work, and it's still a difficult sell. So it's getting there, it's taking...
So part of it too is, right, for the longest time, within the government, right, talking about space, talking about making money, making profit was a dirty word, right? So it takes a culture change, it takes a thought process change for those of us within the government or within NASA especially to say, it's okay to use space to make money. We now have discussions within the program about decisions we're making on different things, and the discussions we have sometimes are because somebody's cash flow is at issue, or they have to, they're not getting their payments because our launch slipped. And who do we put on what launch, and those kinds of things. We're starting to take the business cases into account when we know those are drivers. But we have to know they're drivers for one, and we have to understand them a little bit. And again, you got an agency full of engineers who kind of went into engineering because they weren't really good at business and talking to people and sales. And you've asked that whole group to turn into, salesmen in one part and to be in this sort of customer service job, which none of us went to school to do. So we are working on it, we're getting there, and I think Jeff will attest that when business cases are drivers and there's things that have to be done, not because of technical, I have to get this out the door, or this, this is gonna fall out of the sky, or whatever it might be, but because I get a payment when this happens, and then I have enough cash flow to keep my business going. We understand that, it's starting to matter, we're starting to take that into account, so it's a slow process. The things like CineSpace that we're doing, where we're using, on-orbit imagery and trying to create competitions to get people interested, are a step. Where we're going to struggle, where we struggle now and where we're going to continue to struggle, is when those things require crew time, because crew time is so limited for the resources, it is so constrained to be able to do the research that we want to get done, that CASES is bringing us, that other government agencies are bringing us, that every time those discussions of, art in space or whatever end up saying, and I need crew time, we just go, oh, that hurts so bad, because I've got, we rate it in our engineering heads and go, real research that could change the world and art in space, and we just, it's something we really struggle with. We're aware of it, but we're just not.
That's one of the reasons when Blue first reached out to NanoRacks, I was so excited, because I think one of the impact that XCOR, Virgin, Blue may have on how we do space is that they're going to go with the branding. I think Virgin's already announced the game show, and XCOR has announced a number of ventures as well. And so the way they're igniting the public may put some pressure from down below. And you may see a different NASA in this regard if the suborbital can get going.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think you got to remember that, we don't have a national lab, right? A federal facility to make tchotchkes, right? We don't set up national labs in nuclear energy for them to make tchotchkes either. Same thing for space development, same thing for space exploration, right? We're very fortunate to have a national agency responsible for advancing technology and completing missions related to space exploration, space science, space development. And so I think what we're getting to is emerging understanding that really that future that was described in the question from online, that happens really when you do have commercial stations. And that's why NASA is encouraging the development of those technologies through things like the next BAA. We're going to do that more in the future with NACA type approaches. And I think that's kind of an understanding that that is not really the role of a National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and that's why, in fact, we want commercial space stations to exist as a nation.
But another thing I think we don't think about is outreach, and outreach is a word I sort of really don't like. Engagement is a word I really don't like. Connection is a word I like a little bit better. I'm trying to find my words. But everybody here in the room, well, no, not really marketing. Well, maybe marketing. Everybody here in the room that's interested in entrepreneurial work, and the folks that were on the last panel, for example, one of the things that's happened is there really is this revolution that's going on right now with the space station. And I did a panel last week, and I looked at the audience, and I said, this is your space station. This last panel, you had people basically using the space station to advance their entrepreneurial interests. I don't know about you, but this is my third pass at commercial, and I don't go back as far as Jeffrey here does. He's much older than me. But what I would say is, this is really, truly revolutionary, what's happening right now. And the discussion that Jeff gave earlier about all these different means of access, and that we'll have more soon, and there'll be a glut soon, this sort of challenged everybody here in the audience. Think about how it is that you can start coming to cases, coming to Jeff, coming to NASA with ideas about building businesses utilizing space. And that's a way to make a connection with an entire business community, the entire entrepreneurial movement that has just lit fire here in this country in the last 10 years. That's massive, and that will be a way to sort of bring space home in a way that makes it much more accessible, I think, to people. The more stories there are of space VR, these kinds of companies, then the more people are going to, I think, start to have that connection, because they see that that's a real thing, and it's feeding innovation, and it's feeding creativity in the country, and it's engaging people who are emerging into their careers and wanting to shape the future. And that's a really big deal.
Hi, my name's Enzo Vito. Going back to what was said on how crew time was very important and extremely busy, I can only imagine that commercial stations will have kind of the same busyness as well as importance, but that would require long duration on orbit, which would require extensive training. And with NASA Commercial Crew being announced earlier this month, looking ahead is NASA looking into the private industry for astronaut training?
So it does get discussed, as Mary Lynn says, every so often. Are we looking at it right now at this point in time? No, we're still doing our crew training and things through our normal mission operations director team who does crew training for all the crews. It's absolutely, though, a service that could be marketed, could be developed into another service. It's a challenge. It depends, right? The technology on station that keeps the vehicle there, that keeps the crew alive, frankly, it's really, really old, right? A lot of it was designed and built in the 80s and 90s, and so what's available today, if you were to rebuild a station, is going to be so much different. Ideally, much more robust, much more reliable, that hopefully you wouldn't have to spend as much time as we do keeping systems running and keeping things repaired. It could be a lot more. It is fairly automated, but it could require a lot less time. It's just going to depend how, part of what Jeff said, how big a station you build. You don't need to build one as big as we have. If you're building it for a specific purpose and it's very focused, then it's going to be a lot easier. It's going to require a lot less, infrastructure to keep that system running, I think.
But let me put in a plug for something that happened with FOG, sorry, it's FOG now, right? Okay, it used to be Mission Operations, that's FOD. A few years ago, what was then Mission Operations at JSC, seeing what was happening with commercial, decided to essentially revamp itself. And it moved from big custom platforms to much more commodity-driven computing and IT platforms. It changed the way it was doing operations. It changed the way it was training its flight controllers. And then it restructured its finances so that it actually could do direct billing, which is a huge thing. Okay, this is huge. This is doing it within the existing system. And eventually made itself available. So for example, it is teamed with Boeing, okay, for commercial crew operations, and does so jointly, so that the Boeing operations team and the NASA operations team are working side by side. And that was a huge change, okay? And what it actually did was created a very direct way to transfer knowledge that existed inside NASA, that had been built up inside mission operations, into that sector, okay? And that's available, actually, it was not just Boeing. I mean, it was made available to anyone that was competing, and it's still available, okay, to anyone that's competing or wants to enter into that kind of contract. So those sorts of things are available inside NASA, and that's a great thing that it's done, because it's a direct way, an intercontractual relationship, and transfer knowledge.
I'm going to take. Is it on now? Okay, well. Okay, now, there we go. Moderator's prerogative for the last question. One item you would like to see that for sure should be on the table for government enabling, creating greater enabling activities for commercial space stations. Is it a developmental program? Is it, we're going to get comfortable with service contracts? Is it we're going to get comfortable with logistics contracts? Is it we're going to get comfortable, we're going to take certain pieces of hardware and transfer them to the commercial sector?
Friend Mary Beth. One thing?
One thing. Most important thing.
I need to think about it.
Government is customer.
I would say that the government has to be very creative in contracting. It's something we've been trying to do is to open up any kind of contract, and really not contracting, agreements. Creative and agreement mechanisms, right? Whether it's cooperative contracts in all their varieties, shapes, and forms, Space Act agreements, reimbursables. We have to use and be willing to use every mechanism at our disposal to enable work in whichever way best serves the commercial user.
Yeah, and I'll just really highlight the fundamental knowledge transfer under the NACA type model that we have done for all other forms of aerospace technology is something that we're going to need to do for this form of space technology too. And whether that looks mostly like enabling research on the part of people at NASA and the contractor workforce, whether it looks like something like a catalyst program, right, like the Lunar Catalyst program where you have Space Act agreements in relation to companies. I think that's all to be debated and discussed, but I think that kind of general function of NACA type knowledge transfer related to aerospace technologies for space stations is mine.
And my last would be to let entrepreneurs be entrepreneurs. But part of that is to keep on having panels like this so that people like Jeff can come in and tell you about what's actually happening. Because what you tend to have is one thing you have to be very careful about in business is not to fight yesterday's wars, right? And so NASA really is changing. The entire space business beyond NASA is really changing. And so I think that what we have to do is continue to focus on creating the future we want rather than on fighting the battles from yesterday. And I think that's a joint responsibility. Everybody in the room, everybody that's interested in doing this, Space Agency, the FAA, other agencies.
So what you're saying is everybody should come to NewSpace 2016 in Seattle, right?
Works for me.
With that, I want to thank our panelists. And I believe we're transitioning to lunch.
So we'll have lunch just down the hall if you're joining us for the keynote talk. Otherwise, we'll be resuming programming in this room at 2:15. Thank you.
So I have a lunch ticket.
No, I don't think you did. I don't think you did.
Oh, were you talking to me? Yeah, I have a lunch ticket.
Oh, great stuff. No problem.
But we'll never think commercials. We'll never have that. This will not be commercial.
Okay. I just like to have a quick word with you. My name is Dale Scran. I'm the executive of the Space Society. There are things that I'm the chair of the policy. could sense from the conversation, it was very interesting panel, is that there's some potential, I would like to do better. I could
But the space station wasn't like that. And so.
yeah, that would make any sense. So, but I was just wondering if I could DC sometime. Oh, you're in DC? Okay, so I gotta go to Houston. Okay, so you should feel free to point me to the right person.
I have been for 20 years. Been working on that
You're doing great work, but I want to align better.
Well, me too.
And that's it. And I can also say, I don't know if you have any time at this conference.
I saw their booth, I didn't have a chance to stop. Yeah, no, I was just like nonstop.
Hello? Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, okay. I called her back from, she said, I'm happy to do whatever you want me to do. Cool, this can be on.